You won't believe what my son said after I lost everything. For years, I worked hard to raise him alone. I gave him everything I had. But when I had no place to go, I went to his house. He told me I ruined how his house looked. That was when everything changed. If he thought I would just leave quietly, he didn't know me at all. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I remember the day Leo was born. He was so small, but his eyes were so bright. I held him close and promised to protect him. Now he was the one who pushed me away. Why? What did I do wrong? My heart felt like it was breaking, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. I never thought I would end up at my son's door with a suitcase in ashes. Smoke still stuck to my clothes like my sadness. My house burned down the night before. All my pictures, memories, and life turned to dust. The fire took everything, but it couldn't take the memories inside my heart. I still saw Leo's first steps, his first word, his first day of school. Those memories were safe in me. Even if the house was gone, those moments were still there. In that quiet after the fire, I stood in front of the man I loved most. I hoped and prayed for something I hadn't asked for in many years. His house was very clean and new. It looked like a picture in a magazine. The porch light shone on him as he opened the door. He wore a nice white sweater. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't look at my suitcase or the soot on my coat. He just looked at me like I didn't belong. Then he said, "You can't stay here, Dad. You ruined the look of my house." His words cut deep, like a knife. I felt like I was nothing, but I knew I had to stay strong. I nodded. Maybe I mumbled something, but I remember how the door closed. Soft and final, like the end of a sad story. That sound stayed with me all night. I went to a cheap motel. It cost $28 a night. It smelled like wet carpet, but it had a bed and a lamp. I sat on the bed and looked at my phone. I wanted to call someone, but I had no one to call. My phone was old. The screen was cracked. I had no one to call, not even a friend. I thought about calling Sarah, but she was gone. I closed my eyes. The room was dark. I felt so alone. But then I remembered Leo's smile. That smile gave me strength. I knew I had to keep going. I raised my son alone. His mother left when he was 10. I felt so alone, but then I remembered Leo's smile. That smile gave me strength. I knew I had to keep going. I raised my son alone. His mother left when he was 10. She left me with a house payment, a son, and a broken car that wouldn't start in rain. I worked days at a diner and nights sewing clothes to make rent. I never remarried. I didn't have time, and I didn't want to bring another woman into my son's life unless she would stay. None ever did. Some nights I cried silently. I wondered if I was doing enough, but Leo was my world. He was my reason. I would do anything for him, even if it meant working until my hands hurt. My son got straight A's. He went to college with a scholarship. He became a nutritionist. He married a plastic surgeon and moved to Charleston. I watched him climb up in life. New car, new house, new friends. I was proud. But with every step he took, it felt like he was moving further from me. Still, I never thought he would turn me away when I had nowhere else to go. At the motel, I cried quietly so no one would hear. I'm not a crier, not even when I lost my job, or when my brother died with no family there. But that night, I cried until my throat hurt. Because for the first time I realized something terrible. I had become inconvenient. I was an eyesore. I was a stain on his perfect life. The next morning, I took a long walk. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet led me to an old neighborhood called Oakwood Terrace. That's where I raised my son in a small house with a chain-link fence and dandelions in the yard. I hadn't been back in years. That's where I saw David. He was sitting on his porch, shelling peas into a big bowl like he did when we were young. He squinted at me, then laughed so loud it scared the birds. "Rob Walker," he said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell him everything. I just said I was staying at the motel, needed air, and was figuring things out. David's eyes were sharp. He didn't believe me. "You're not figuring things out," he said. "You're trying not to fall apart." David's eyes were filled with years of stories. He told me about his own son who left town. "He's a good kid," David said, "but I didn't know how to show him I loved him." I nodded. We all have struggles, but we can choose to fight. We sat for hours. We talked about old times, our sons, and the years that passed like wild horses. Then David said something that hit me hard. You still have fight in you, Rob. You just forgot how to use it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the motel bed and thought about everything I did for my son, the years I gave up for him, the way I put him first every single day. And now I wasn't even good enough to sit on his couch. In the morning, I opened my little black notebook, the one where I wrote every penny I saved. Stocks, old CDs, sewing money. I added it all up. I had just enough. Not enough for revenge, but enough for something better. 2 weeks later, I found the house. Big white columns, wraparound porch, views of the marsh. It was listed as a Southern dream house. My son had once circled a picture of a similar house in a magazine and said, "One day I'm going to live there." I bought it in cash. Then I took a picture. Fresh white paint, neat lawn, a for sale sign out front. I texted it to him with no words. It took less than 5 minutes for him to call. As I stood in front of the house, the sun was setting. The sky turned orange and pink. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new. What if this house could be more than just a home? What if it could be a place for others who needed a second chance? I took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. Dad, his voice was tight. Why did you send me a picture of that house? Because I bought it, I said. He was silent. It's yours, I added. Or it could be, but I'm thinking of selling it. His voice trembled. Why? Why would you do that? Because, I said calmly, it fits your style. I hung up before he could answer, and for the first time in years I smiled. But I didn't know then that this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would break us and maybe put us back together. He didn't call again that night. I half expected him to, maybe to scream, maybe to cry, but silence came like fog around a cemetery, thick, cold, and full of things people don't say. I stayed another night at the motel. The mattress felt harder now. The hum of the vending machine outside was louder than I remembered. I stared at the ceiling and let the stillness stretch. For once I was in control. The next morning I went back to the house I bought. It sat on a hill with a porch that begged for Sunday morning coffee. I walked through it room by room. The floors creaked like they were remembering their past. The air smelled of lemon polish, and something older like history waiting to be rewritten. The dining room had a crystal chandelier that caught the morning light and made rainbows on the walls. I imagined my son sitting at the head of the table, wine in hand, trying to impress guests. I wondered if he'd ever see it as more than a photo on his phone. Then he showed up. I was in the sunroom, sipping cold coffee, when I heard tires on the gravel. I didn't move. After a minute, I heard the front door open. He used the key I sent him 2 days ago. "Dad," he said softly. I stayed silent. He found me eventually, his shoes clicking on the wood like gunshots. He looked like he hadn't slept. Eyes puffy, hair messy. "You really bought this?" he asked, looking around like the house might vanish if he blinked. I nodded. "Why?" "Because you said I ruined your style. I figured I'd find one that suited you better." His face crumpled for a moment. Then he got serious. "This isn't funny, Dad. I'm not laughing. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I'd love and then put a for sale sign on it." "I thought you liked signs," I said. He blinked. "Is this revenge?" "No," I said. "It's a mirror." We sat in silence. For a long time. Finally, he whispered, "You don't understand how things are now. My world is perfect. Everything has a place, a look, a standard, and I don't fit in that." He swallowed. "You're unpredictable. You say things, you don't think about how it sounds, and you don't try to blend in." I stared at him. "I didn't raise you to blend in. I raised you to stand tall." He looked away. "Is that why you've been rewriting things?" I asked. "What are you talking about? You told people your mother left and never looked back. But that's not the truth, is it?" His mouth opened, but no words came. I stood up, walked to a drawer, and pulled out an old envelope. I handed it to him. His fingers shook as he opened it. It was from his mother, dated 8 years after she left. She tried to come back, begged for forgiveness, said she found God, found purpose, found strength to be better. She said she visited twice, but wasn't allowed through the door. His lips moved as he read. Then he sank onto the couch. "I told her to leave," he whispered. "She called." I answered. "She said she wanted to see us. I told her we didn't need her. I was 16. I thought I was protecting you. I sat beside him. You worked so hard. She left you with everything. I wanted to punish her, and so you erased her. Tears filled his eyes. I never told you. I didn't think you'd forgive me. I reached for his hand. He flinched at first, then let me hold it. There's more than one way to ruin a home, I said quietly. Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence. We sat there for a long time, the weight of years pressing down on both of us. I don't deserve this house, he said finally. That's not for me to decide. His eyes found mine. What if I wanted to earn it? I didn't answer. Just looked out the window at the garden full of wildflowers, life pushing through cracks. Then we'd have to start again, I said, and it won't be easy. I don't want easy, he said, voice breaking. I want you back. A part of me softened, but another part, the part that remembered the cold porch light and his perfect sweater, held firm. Then don't say it, I whispered. Show it. He nodded, and just like that, the first brick of the wall between us cracked. But as I would soon learn, the house wasn't the only thing full of secrets. There was one more envelope in that box, and it would change everything. It was a yellowed envelope sealed with brittle tape and buried at the very bottom of the box. I hadn't noticed it until the day after my son left the house in tears, promising to try. I stared at it for a while, sitting at the breakfast nook where the morning sun hit just right. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the for sale sign I hadn't taken down yet. Maybe part of me wanted it to stay there a little longer, like a challenge, like a dare. When I finally opened the envelope, the handwriting nearly stopped my heart. It was hers, Sarah's. I hadn't seen her handwriting in over 30 years, but I'd know it anywhere. Sharp, slanted, hurried, like she was always halfway out the door, even when she was sitting still. The letter was dated just 4 years ago, not decades ago, not ancient history. This was recent. Rob, if this finds you, it means I finally found the nerve to try again. I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I've spent the last 10 years trying to make peace with the woman I used to be. I was a coward. I let my fear and my failure eat me alive. But I want you to know leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. I tried to come back twice. Leo wouldn't let me through the door. He said you were better off, that you'd moved on, that I'd only bring pain. I stopped reading. My hands trembled. My eyes blurred. I could still see him, 16, sharp-tongued, brittle with pride. He'd always been protective, even as a child, fiercely loyal to me, and furious with the world for making him grow up too soon. But he'd kept this from me. For years I pressed the letter to my chest and rocked slightly in the chair. There was a pain in me I couldn't name. Not betrayal exactly, more like grief given a second life. When I finished the letter, I learned that Sarah had remarried once briefly. No children. Her husband had died of cancer, and afterward she'd moved to Tennessee, lived simply, worked at a used bookstore, wrote letters she never sent. The last line undid me. If I don't get to see you again in this life, know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I had to find her. I didn't know why. Not exact closure. Maybe, or the need to look her in the eye and decide once and for all if there was anything left between us. David was the first to notice something had shifted. You've got that old fire in your eyes again, he said, leaning over the fence between his porch and mine. You going somewhere? Tennessee, I said. Maybe for a few days, maybe longer. He raised an eyebrow. That where the bones are buried? I smiled barely. No, but maybe it's where I left part of myself. 3 days later, I drove west. I hadn't been on a road trip alone in decades. I kept the windows down and the radio low. I passed through towns with names I couldn't pronounce, and diners that served coffee so strong it could wake the dead. The road stretched out like a long, thin ribbon. I thought about all the miles I'd driven with Leo in the car. He used to sing songs in the back seat. Now the silence felt heavy, but maybe this trip would help me find the words I needed. By the time I got to the address in the letter, a little one-story home with faded blue shutters, it was dusk. There was a for rent sign out front. My stomach dropped. I knocked anyway. A thin woman in her 40s opened the door. She looked confused when I asked for Sarah Walker. She passed away last spring, she said softly. I'm the landlord now. It was like the ground disappeared beneath me. She died. She nodded. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast. Didn't even make it 3 months after diagnosis. I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry. I just stood there numb. I felt like the ground had disappeared. My knees went weak. But then I remembered something Sarah had told me once. Even when you're broken, you can still be strong. I took a deep breath. I had to be strong for Leo. Then the woman said, Are you Rob? I blinked. Yes. She smiled, warm and kind. She talked about you all the time. Said you were the one that got away. She left something for you. She led me inside. The house smelled like old books and lemon oil. On a shelf near the window was a small box, wooden, carved with tiny birds. Inside were photos of me and Leo from years ago, a pressed flower from our wedding, and another letter. This one was shorter. You were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you knew deep down that I always loved you. And if there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting. I don't remember the drive back, only that the sun was rising by the time I reached Charleston again. I pulled into the driveway of the house and sat for a long time. Leo's car was already there. He was sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled to his chest, makeup streaked down his face. When I got out, he stood but didn't speak. I walked up slowly, the letter from Sarah still in my coat pocket. I didn't hand it to him. Not yet. I know, he said before I could open my mouth. I know about the letter. I know you know. I nodded. Why, Leo? I thought I was protecting you, he whispered. I thought she didn't deserve you. I was wrong. I know that now. I searched his face, really looked, and for the first time in years I saw the little boy who used to curl up beside me when the power went out, the one who believed I could fix anything. I forgave her, I said. He choked out a sob. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer. Not yet, because forgiveness isn't a lightning bolt. It's a slow rain. It takes time, and I needed him to feel it, earn it, carry it like I carried him. The truth was out now, but the story was far from over, because redemption isn't given. It's built. It started with paint. Not expensive wallpaper, not marble countertops, just paint. White, soft yellow, lavender in the bedrooms, warm, welcoming colors. Leo rolled the first coat on the living room wall himself. Hair tied up in a knot, sleeves rolled back. His designer nails were chipped by the end of the first day. He didn't even notice. He was trying. I could feel it in the way he moved around the house. Not as its new owner, but as someone relearning what it meant to belong somewhere. The mansion, once a symbol of perfection and pretense, began to breathe like a living thing. The curtains came down. The gleaming Art Deco chandeliers were swapped for soft Edison bulbs. He even let David choose the kitchen tile. Lord help him, we worked side by side. Me, David, a few old friends from the neighborhood who hadn't seen Leo since he wore braces. They all came back. Not for his name, but for what the house was becoming. Not a home, a haven. We named it Rose Harbor. A place for older men cast aside by family, abandoned by partners, or simply left behind by the world. Men like me, like David, like so many who had nowhere to go when life decided they were no longer useful. It was Leo's idea. I want to fix what I broke, he told me one night as we painted the porch swing a deep teal. Not just between us. I want to be someone who makes space for men like you. Men like us. I didn't say much. I just kept painting. But something in me softened. A knot inside my chest slowly came undone. 3 months later, the house opened its doors. We held a gathering on the front lawn. Nothing fancy. Plastic chairs, lemonade, peach cobbler, a band made up of high school kids from down the street. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to Leo's graduation. It still fit. Leo stood on the porch and addressed the crowd. My father built me a life when he had nothing, he said, voice shaking. I turned my back on him when all he asked for was a place to sleep. I was cruel. I was selfish. And he didn't repay me with anger. He repaid me with a gift I didn't deserve. But today, I'm asking for something better than forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance. The crowd was silent. Then a few people clapped. Then more. Then everyone. I cried quietly in my chair, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin that smelled like barbecue sauce. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch steps and watched the stars blink into the sky. Leo brought me a glass of iced tea, sat beside me, and leaned his head on my shoulder like he used to when he was little. "You were right," he whispered. "A house doesn't make a home." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the deed, folded, worn, signed over to his name, months ago. "I already gave this to you," I said, "but I want you to really understand what that means." He stared at it. "You get the house," I said, "but Rose Harbor stays. The men stay. The mission stays." He nodded, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. "I won't let you down again." I squeezed his hand. "Then we'll be fine." A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Me and Sarah from a summer picnic when Leo was 3. We were smiling at each other like no one else existed. On the back, in that same slanted handwriting, were 6 words. "You made it home." I knew. I don't know who sent it. Maybe one of her bookstore coworkers. Maybe God. Maybe just the wind carrying things where they're meant to go. All I know is that the house is never quiet now. There's laughter in the halls, stories being told in rocking chairs on the porch, men dancing in the kitchen at midnight. There are scars here, but also healing, also grace. Leo still gets frustrated sometimes. He hasn't lost that sharpness, but he laughs more now, holds me tighter when he hugs me, and when he introduces me to new residents, he says, "This is my father, Robert. He's the reason all of this exists." And I smile because I am. I was never a perfect father, but I was his father. And in the end, that was enough to build something that mattered. Something beautiful. Something that didn't just fit a style. Something that saved us both. It had been exactly 6 days since Leo's confession on the porch. 6 days since he said the words I'd waited 30 years to hear. "I want you back." But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ready to be back just yet. You see, healing isn't just about putting the broken pieces together. Sometimes it's about staring at the shattered mess long enough to understand why it broke in the first place. And for me, that meant going back to the beginning. I hadn't visited Oakwood Terrace in nearly a decade. But on that 7th morning, I found myself driving down its cracked streets, past the overgrown lots and rusted mailboxes. That neighborhood raised me as much as I raised Leo, and buried beneath its peeling paint and forgotten porches were answers I didn't know I still needed. The house I'd raised Leo in was still standing, barely. The paint had long since flaked off. The fence leaned like it was tired of standing, but the tree in the front yard, the one he used to climb every summer, was taller, stronger, blooming with white blossoms that looked like little bursts of hope. I stepped out of the car and just stood there, and that's when I saw her. Mrs. Mason. She'd lived across the street when I was still packing lunch boxes and patching jeans. She had to be in her 80s now, but she looked just as elegant as ever, sitting on her porch with a wide-brimmed hat and a mug of tea, like time hadn't dared to touch her. "Rob Walker," she called out. "Is that you?" I laughed through the lump in my throat and walked across the street. We talked for hours, about the old days, about how the neighborhood had changed, about how we had changed. And then out of nowhere she said something that froze me in my chair. "I always wondered what really happened between you and Sarah." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She sipped her tea, slow, deliberate. "Saw her, a few years after she left. She came by the house, asking if I knew where you'd moved. Said she was trying to find her boys." My heart pounded. "You never told me." She looked down. "Guilty. I didn't want to stir up pain. But now that I see you again, I think maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed to know she tried." That was the 2nd time someone told me she came back. And it finally clicked. Leo didn't just close the door on his mother. He buried the truth. All of it. Out of pain. Out of fear. Maybe out of love. Twisted and misdirected. But it had left me living in a false version of my own story for decades. I went back to the house. Not the old one, my house, the one I bought with the porch swing and the columned front, the one that still had the for sale sign out front, leaning slightly now from the wind. When I stepped through the door, the air heavier. I don't know if it was the weight of memory or the truth, finally sinking into the walls. But I knew what I had to do next. I went up to the attic. Not many people knew about it. Not even Leo. It was tucked behind a narrow door near the back of the upstairs hallway. The space was unfinished, dusty, with beams overhead, and the smell of cedar and thyme. And that's where I found the box. I hadn't opened it since the week after the fire, the one that burned down my old rental and forced me to Leo's porch in the first place. It had survived the blaze because it was in the trunk of my car, along with a few saved items I never unpacked. I'd stashed it here when I moved the rest of my things in quietly. Inside, photos, letters, receipts, and a folded piece of notebook paper torn at the edges. It was Leo's handwriting. "Dad, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't say it to your face. You loved me so hard that I didn't know how to love you back. Every success I had felt like a debt I owed you. Every mistake you made felt like a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I didn't understand what you gave up for me until it was too late. My knees gave out. I sat on the attic floor, the box beside me, and wept. Because for the first time, I saw him not as the man who slammed a door in my face, but as the boy I raised, the boy who had been carrying just as much pain as I had. Only his had turned into walls, and mine had turned into distance. That night, I didn't call him. I did something else. I took down the for sale sign. The next morning, I went to a lawyer. I signed the deed over to Leo's name, but not just as a house, as a responsibility. It came with one condition. The home must be turned into a non-profit residence for men over who've been displaced, rejected, or left with nowhere to go. It wasn't a trap. It was a lifeline. I sent the papers to Leo with a note that read, "Your style doesn't define your worth, but maybe now it can help rebuild someone else's." The following day, I heard a knock on the door. Leo was standing there. No makeup, no pretense, just tears in his eyes and a folder in his hand. He handed me the papers signed. "I want to help them," he said. "I want to start with you." And just like that, the door that had once slammed shut opened again. But this time it opened for so many more. There's a moment right before dawn when the sky turns that deep velvet blue and everything feels suspended. Not quite night, not quite morning, just stillness, like the whole world is holding its breath. That's when I stood on the front porch of Rose Harbor, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll in from the marsh. The house was quiet, peaceful for now. Inside, 2 men were asleep in rooms we'd prepared just the day before. John, who'd been kicked out of his son's home after he broke his hip and became too much work, and Richard, a former teacher who'd lived in his car for nearly a year after his wife drained their retirement and vanished. They weren't statistics to me. They were me, and they were Leo had taken the papers and run with them. He hired a nonprofit consultant, reached out to city leaders, met with social workers. He even set up a small fund to cover initial living expenses. Every decision, every plan he brought to me first. "Does this feel right, Dad?" he'd ask. I never thought I'd hear him say that again. In between meetings, he helped clean rooms, paint furniture, even drove the old church van across town to pick up donations. And each day he'd ask me questions. Real questions. Not the polite, hollow kind that come with small talk, but the kind that meant something. What did you dream about before you had me? Did you ever want to just run away? Did I make you happy? That last one took my breath away. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You were the best and hardest thing that ever happened to me." He didn't flinch. He nodded. That's when I knew he was changing, and maybe so was I. But the past wasn't done with us. Not yet. 3 weeks after Rose Harbor officially opened, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Nashville area code. My stomach dropped. The voice on the other end was soft, shaky. "Is this Robert Walker?" "Yes. I'm so sorry to call like this. I'm Sarah's nurse. I cared for her before she passed." I sat down slowly, heart pounding. "She spoke about you every day," she said. "But there's something else. She left something behind for you. Something private." 2 days later, a package arrived at Rose Harbor. Small, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal, aged and worn, the spine nearly falling apart. On the first page, in bold, familiar script, "To the man who carried me in his heart, even when I was too lost to return. I didn't open it right away. I waited until nightfall, until the house was quiet, and the tea was hot, and the lights were low. Leo sat across from me on the floor, cross-legged, waiting, together. We read every word, her regrets, her memories, the moments she decided to leave, the moments she tried to come back, the letters she never sent. The one time she stood outside Leo's high school graduation in the shadows, watching from a distance because she didn't know if she deserved to be there. She'd seen us. She'd never stopped seeing us. In the journal, she wrote about the day Leo was born. He was so tiny, but his eyes were so bright, like a new star in the sky. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I felt like I knew her better than ever before. At the very end, she'd written, "If this journal finds its way to you, it means I finally got something right. Tell Leo I never stopped loving him. Tell him I forgave him. Tell him I understand." Leo pressed his forehead to the pages and wept, not like a child, not like a man, broken, but like someone who'd finally been freed. We buried the journal under the magnolia tree out back beside a bench we'd painted soft blue. We didn't mark the spot. We didn't need to. The magnolia tree had been there for over 50 years. Its roots were deep, like our family's history. Maybe one day, its branches would grow over the spot, hiding the past, but letting new life grow. Time passed. More men came, each one with a story, each one carrying bags heavier than anything leather or canvas could hold. And every time I heard them say, "I didn't think anyone would take me in," I felt something in my chest expand. Leo became their advocate. I became their storyteller. And together, we became something neither of us had ever truly known. One night, as we sat on the porch swing, his feet tucked under a blanket, my hand resting on his, he asked, "Do you think she knows what we've built?" I looked out at the house, glowing from within. Laughter floated down from an open window. Someone was playing soft jazz in the parlor. "I think she does," I said. And I meant it, because sometimes redemption isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in a parade or thunderclap. Sometimes it looks like a man walking through the front door with shaking hands and tired eyes, and finding a bed with fresh sheets and a handwritten note on the pillow that says, "You are home." We saved each other, my son and I, not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing to rise from it, and I've learned this much. The most beautiful things don't match anyone's style. They just feel like they belong, like love, like truth, like coming home after the longest journey of your life. 3 months after Rose Harbor opened its doors, word had spread far beyond Charleston. Local news stations ran a feature calling it a southern sanctuary for the forgotten. Donations began to pour in. Furniture, books, fresh linens. One man dropped off 5 brand new mattresses with tears in his eyes, whispering, "My dad died alone. I wish he'd had this." But no one knew what really made Rose Harbor sacred. It wasn't the porch swing or the new garden beds or the hand-sewn curtains. Leo insisted on making himself. It was the men who'd been told they were too loud, too needy, too complicated. Men who'd been left behind by their children, their wives, or time itself. Every single one carried stories like suitcases bursting at the seams. One of them was Richard, 82, former jazz singer. 2 strokes, no family left except a nephew who hadn't called in years. He showed up at our gate in a wheelchair with a single bag and a bottle of cheap cologne tucked in the side pocket. "I heard you take men like me," he said. "I don't have much, but I can still hum a tune." We took him in that night. Richard became our heartbeat. He sang at breakfast, told wild stories about smoky nightclubs and love affairs with saxophone players. The other men gathered around him like moths to flame. He reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Joy isn't just survival, it's singing. Anyway, Leo adored him. He sat with Richard every Thursday night, brushing his hair, listening to the same stories again and again, never interrupting, never rushing. I watched them from the hallway, and sometimes, just sometimes, I saw the son I'd always hoped he'd become. But not every moment was easy. One night, Richard collapsed in the hallway. His breathing was shallow. His eyes rolled back. Leo froze. I knelt beside him, called, held his hand until the ambulance came. As they wheeled him out, he looked at me with glassy eyes and whispered, "Don't let me go in silence."
He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Leo. We sat in the kitchen just like we used to when he was a child with nightmares, both of us gripping steaming mugs. We didn't drink from.
"He's dying," Leo said, voice hollow. "He's living," I corrected, "right now, and until his last breath. We treat him like he matters." Leo stared at me, eyes wide and wounded. "I was so scared," he said. "He looked like you." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about Richard or the house or even Sarah. This was about the fear my son had carried for decades. The fear that one day I'd vanish, and he'd be left with nothing but guilt and regret. That fear had made him cruel. But now it was making him brave. Richard made it through the night, and he came home 5 days later with an oxygen tank and a playlist of Ella Fitzgerald songs. We played every afternoon. He was weaker, quieter, but he was still Richard. On his final morning, he asked for one thing: let me go out singing. We dressed him in a blue velvet robe, sat him on the porch swing with a blanket around his legs. The sun was just beginning to rise when he opened his mouth and sang the first few lines of Misty, his voice soft, trembling, but still his. By the last note, he was gone. As he sang, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. The birds outside stopped chirping. Even the wind paused. It was like the world was paying respect to a man who had lived fully. Leo held his hand tight, tears falling like rain. Leo held his hand the entire time. We buried his ashes in the garden beneath the rosebush we'd planted in his honor. The men each placed a flower on the soil. Leo read a poem he'd written by hand, and I wept openly, not just for Richard, but for all of us who had ever been told we were too much or not enough. That night, Leo crawled into my bed like he did when he was 5. No words, just tears and silence, and that deep, aching kind of love that has nowhere else to go. I held him until he fell asleep. The next morning I found him in the sunroom, coffee in hand, staring out the window. "I want to write about this place," he said. "The stories, the men, everything." I smiled. "Then start with your own," he turned to me. "You think anyone would want to hear it?" I leaned in, kissed his forehead. "Leo Walker," I said, "your story is the one that built this house." And I meant it. Because, in the end, it wasn't vengeance that made me whole. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the letter. It was him choosing to become a man who didn't just apologize, but changed. And through that change, he gave me something no one else ever had. Not just a second chance, but the life I should have had all along. A week after Richard's funeral, I found myself sitting alone in the sunroom, sorting through the last of the donation boxes. There were crocheted blankets, a stack of gently used robes, and a handwritten note from a church group in Savannah. Every stitch made with love. I held one of the blankets to my chest. It smelled like lavender and memory. It had been 4 months since I'd bought the house. 4 months since Leo had told me I ruined his style. 4 months since everything in my life turned upside down, and somehow through all the heartache, found a way to settle exactly where it needed to. But peace is fun. It shows up not with fireworks or fanfare, but in the quiet moments, the ones where you least expect it, like when David barged in, waving a newspaper in the air. "Guess who's front page news again, sugar?" He slapped the Charleston Gazette onto the table. There we were, me, Leah, a group of men from Rose Harbor, arms around each other in front of the porch, all of us grinning like fools. From rejection to redemption, the home changing lives in Charleston. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not because I liked looking at myself, I still didn't, but because I barely recognized the man in the picture. Not the hair, not the dress, but the expression. I looked happy. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a delivery or a social worker. It was a boy, maybe 16, thin, nervous, clutching an envelope like it might bite him. "You, Robert?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the envelope, then turned and ran down the steps before I could ask a single question. Inside was a letter not typed, written in pen. Careful script. "Mr. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your wife. Sarah worked with my father at the bookstore. She used to talk about you a lot, said you were the strongest man she ever met. She gave me this letter months before she passed, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw the news article about Rose Harbor. Now I know. I hope this gives you peace. I sat down slowly. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. Sarah's handwriting was messier this time. Weaker, but it was hers. Rob, if you're reading this, it means someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could have sat beside you, held your hand, and said these words out loud, but life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. I know what I did. I know what I left behind. I know I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you loved me anyway. I see that now in this house, in what you're building. You turned rejection into refuge, pain into purpose. You turned our unfinished story into something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but maybe in some strange way, you've brought us all home, always yours. Sa. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not the kind of tears that break you, the kind that release you. That night, I called Leo outside. The moon was high. The air smelled like gardenia. I handed him the letter. He read it in silence, one hand covering his mouth. When he finished, he leaned his head against my shoulder just like he had as a little boy. I wish I'd known her better, he whispered. You still can, I said. Through this, through us. We sat there until the stars faded into morning, and that's when I knew we'd made it through. Not by erasing what hurt, not by pretending it hadn't happened, but by carrying it with grace, with grit, and with the unshakable belief that it's never too late to make something good out of what's been broken. Rose Harbor still stand and still arrive, bags in hand, eyes wide with fear and hope, and every time I greet them at the door with a smile and say welcome home. Because I've learned the truth. Redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes you have to build the house yourself and leave the door open. It was a Wednesday when the last box was unpacked in the library. A room we never thought we'd fill, now overflowing with donated books, mismatched reading chairs, a grandfather clock that ticked a little offbeat, and sunlight that poured through the windows like grace itself. I ran my fingers along the spines. Romance novels, self-help, old cookbooks, a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird with someone's name scribbled inside. Gloria, I smiled, thinking how stories survive us. Leo came in behind me, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a folder under his arm. His face was flushed, glowing in a way that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with meaning. He handed me the folder. Inside were the final approval documents from the state. Rose Harbor, owned, certified transitional living nonprofit. It's official now, he said, biting his lip to keep it together. We're real. I took the papers in hand and nodded slowly. You were always real, I whispered. You just had to remember. We spent the afternoon hanging photos in the hallway, portraits of the men who'd stayed with us, each framed with their names etched below, not just to honor them, to see them as people, as stories, as proof that second chances can grow roots. David joined us with a tray of lemon bars and sass. Y'all gonna cry every time someone hangs a picture, he teased. Probably, I said, grinning. Good, he nodded. Means you haven't turned into stone statues just yet. Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, not fixing my hair, not adjusting my clothes, just looking, really looking. For the first time in decades, I didn't see a man who had been left rejected or forgotten. I saw someone whole. That's when I remembered something from long ago. A list I'd written in the back of my old journal. A list titled When I Have a Home Again. I dug through the drawers until I found it. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still there. A porch swing that creaks, a kitchen full of noise, laughter in the halls, music at night, peace in my bones, a son who sees me. I'd checked every box. I folded the list carefully, pressed it between two books on the shelf, and walked back into the hallway. That's when I saw him, Leo, standing by the front door, hands tucked in the pockets, his sweater, watching the evening settle in through the glass. When he turned around, there were tears in his eyes again, but this time they were soft, grateful. He reached for my hand, held it like it was something sacred. I found something today, he said quietly. He led me to the office and handed me an envelope. A new one, unopened, postmarked from Tennessee. No return address. Inside was a black and white photo. Sarah, me, Leo, no more than 3 on her shoulders. All of us laughing. On the back, scribbled in blocky handwriting, "He turned out just fine." No signature, no explanation. Just one final whisper from the universe. And I smiled. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. Life never wraps up in neat little bows. It twists, it unravels, it bends in ways we never see coming. But if we're lucky, if we're brave, it gives us chances to heal what we thought was lost forever. That night we lit candles in the window, not for the dead, but for the living. For every man still on the road, still searching, still hoping. The porch was full of voices, laughter, hands holding hands under warm throws. Someone played guitar softly. The scent of cornbread and cinnamon drifted through the air, and I thought, this is the ending I never knew I wanted, but it's the one I earned. Not through perfection, through resilience, through truth, through love that refused to give up, even when it was told it didn't belong. Leo looked at me and said, "Dad, you built this." I shook my head. We built this, and that's how you reclaim your story. Not by erasing the pain, but by filling the silence it left behind with voices that say, "You still matter. You are not alone. You are home." The fall air was crisp the morning I found the letter tucked beneath my porch pillow. I almost missed it. I had come out early before sunrise, wrapped in my old flannel robe, ready to sip coffee and listen to the creak of the porch swing like I did every morning now. But when I leaned back, I felt something crinkle underneath me. A plain envelope. No stamp, no name, just one word on the front. "Robert?" I stared at it for a long time. Leah was inside, still asleep. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of birds waking up and the occasional whistle of a car passing down the hill. The rest of the men were asleep, too. A calm had settled over Rose Harbor, one of those rare golden mornings where everything feels suspended in grace. I opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed formal, and then I saw the header, the law office of Franklin and Maynard. At first my heart sank. I thought maybe there was unfinished business from Sarah, or worse, some dispute over the house, the nonprofit, a tangle of legal red tape I hadn't seen coming. But no, it wasn't bad news. It was a gift. The letter explained that Sarah's small estate, mostly made up of a pension, a few royalties from a book project, and a modest life insurance policy, had named me the primary beneficiary. There was more. She had designated a percent to be transferred directly to Rose Harbor, under a special clause for the continuation of the love that was never lost, only misplaced. I pressed my hand to my mouth and wept right there on the porch swing. The letter clutched to my chest. She hadn't forgotten. She'd prepared in her own quiet way. Sarah had come home, too. Later that day, I told Leo. He didn't say a word, just wrapped his arms around me, so tightly, I thought my ribs would crack. He whispered, "She never stopped trying to fix it, did she?" "No," I said, "and neither did you." With the inheritance, we expanded Rose Harbor, added 2 more bedrooms, a new communal kitchen, small writing room overlooking the marsh. Leo's idea. We called it Sarah's room, not because of guilt, because of hope. Word traveled fast. Within weeks, we had interviews lined up. More funding, even a woman from the New York Times called. Leo handled it all with grace. I watched him on the phone, clipboard in one hand, glasses perched on his nose. My son, no longer a man trapped in pride and perfection. Now he led with purpose. One night, we hosted a candlelight dinner. All the men, staff, friends from town. Even David put on a tie. As we sat around the table, passing bowls of mashed potatoes and cornbread, someone asked, "What do you call this place really? A shelter? A home?" I smiled and looked at Leo, and he answered, "This," he said, "is everyone." Quiet because it was true. Rose Harbor wasn't just a house. It was the start of 100 second chances. Mine, Leo's, Richard's, Sarah's, and maybe yours too. So, if you're reading this or listening or sitting in your own silence, wondering if anyone would ever open the door for you again, I want you to know something. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be polished. You don't need to match the style. You just need to keep going, because somewhere out there, a door is waiting to open, and someone is standing on the other side whispering the words that saved my life. Welcome home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and hype the video. Feel free to share your story in the comments. Your story matters to us.